Welcome to Changing Places video number 3. The first one kind of introduces you to the key ideas of the module and some key terms. Number 2 is about representation. This is where we begin economic change. So this is where it begins in the module booklet, and obviously I've got a PowerPoint to go with it, but it kind of looks like that. And what you should find is that you can just scribble your notes in the margins of these pages. There shouldn't be too much extra writing that you need to do, unless of course you want to, and you are very, very welcome. Okay, what I always start this section of the module with is just getting you to think of some jobs. And when we did this lesson, of course, we were in lockdown, so I got you to do this in the Microsoft Teams meeting chat, and usually we would have done it in class. And usually we get, a really nice selection of jobs. What is the point of that, I hear you ask? Well, it's because that before we go any further, we need to understand that jobs can be classified into different sectors: primary, secondary, tertiary. And one of the first things that might pop into your head is, oh, those words are quite familiar. And we use them a lot in English. You went to primary school and then secondary school. And if you go to university, you will be in your tertiary education. You might also have heard of primary and secondary hazards in geography, possibly. You may have heard of the primary colours. You get the idea. They are numbers that mean order. Primary is first, secondary is second, tertiary is third, and it goes on. Quaternary is fourth, quinary is fifth, and so on. So let's get that sorted. They're not these random weird words, they are numbers. Primary is first, secondary is second, tertiary is third. Okay, how does that apply to jobs? Well, let's go back to, the beginning of humans. And essentially, folks, these are the order that the jobs would have appeared in. When we were hunter-gatherers, the first thing that we would have done is we would have needed to get food. We would have needed to cut trees down for fires and to build shelters. That probably came a little bit later, but we would have discovered that flint made good weapons. Eventually, we would have discovered fossil fuels and all sorts of things. We needed to catch fish. So the primary sector jobs were the first jobs, and they are involved in raw materials, the basic production of goods. Then, pretty quickly, hot on the heels of that, I would imagine, would have come the secondary sector. The secondary sector is making things, production of goods, manufacturing, if you like. It is where you make things. Factories are the obvious, but also if you work in the building industry, to be fair, if you're a chef or a cook, if you are involved in craft work, you make things, don't you? The tertiary sector is probably where most of the jobs you thought of came from. And that's because in the UK these days, the tertiary sector is the biggest bit, and we'll be talking about that. We'll kind of work our way towards that, ladies and gents. But the vast majority of people that you know will work in the tertiary sector. And the way to figure it out is if when you go to work you are not involved in getting raw materials out of the ground or out of the sea, and you don't make anything, you work in the tertiary sector. So teaching, accounting, being a lawyer, offering massages or pedicures. If you are a consultant, if you are a solicitor, if you're a police officer, if you're a nurse, blah, blah, blah. Most people work in the service sector in the UK. Okay. Now, once you've got your head around that, we then talk about how the jobs that people do in a country change over time. And we are asked to focus on the UK, which makes sense because that's the country that you are doing your A-level in. But these basic patterns will happen in most countries of the world, but we'll get to that eventually, I promise. So as the jobs that people do change, the places change, and that's the link. But we won't get to that for a good couple of lessons. Okay, so the jobs that people do can all be classified into different sectors. Job number one. Firstly then, the primary sector, getting raw materials out of the ground and out of the sea, that's very, very, very small in the UK now. It used to be massive, it isn't now. That's your kind of first learning point, if you like. I couldn't get a graph that goes back for ages and ages, but it would have showed you essentially the same pattern. The primary sector has just got smaller and smaller and smaller. You don't need to learn any facts and figures, you just need to know that it's got smaller. What you do need to know is why. Why? And it's a combination of two things. The first of which is mechanisation. If you think about farming, fishing, mining, forestry, you can now do it with the use of machinery, of technology. You don't need loads of people cutting the grass, turning over, gathering. You can get big farm machinery that will do it for you. Exactly the same in fishing. You can buy lots of technology that will do it all for you. So the replacement of people with machines, which is called mechanisation, will dramatically reduce the number of people that you need. All right, so that's the first reason the primary sector has declined. And the second reason is it's not exactly very attractive. It's dangerous. So I've given you some facts and figures about farming. You've got a picture there of a fishing boat out in a storm. The primary sector is not very well paid. It's very weather dependent often, not so much mining, but the others are. You're not really guaranteed an income. You don't get time off very easily. And if I was to ask most of you what you wanted to be when you grow up, I'm still trying to work out what I want to be when I grow up. No one will generally choose the primary sector. It's just not attractive. Okay, so the primary sector has got smaller because of mechanisation and the fact it's not very attractive as an industry to work in. The secondary sector wasn't very big, became massive, now isn't very big again. So it kind of gets bigger and gets smaller again. And I will show you some data at the end. We in the UK call that the Industrial Revolution. And that happened in the Victorian times, and it was incredible, to be honest. Now, what I said to you in the lesson about this is if you have done quite a lot on the Industrial Revolution in your education, you've probably got as much as you need. If you're not really very sure what it is or what happened, or you don't believe you've ever done anything on it, might I suggest that you do a little bit of internet research, watch a few YouTube videos. You can see that I've linked a couple here. But if you put something like UK Industrial Revolution educational or something, you will find that there's huge numbers of videos that will just explain to you what was going on in the UK. But essentially, in a nutshell, it's when we started building lots and lots of factories. We started making things, which of course is the secondary sector. But we don't anymore, do we? Do you remember I said the secondary sector rose, and we had this amazing transformative period of the UK's history called the Industrial Revolution. But now we've lost all our factories. Why did that happen? Well, that's part and parcel of all sorts of things. It's part and parcel of globalization, which we've learned about before. Globalization is the increasing interconnectedness of the world. And it happens because of transport and technology. If you could put your factory in another country and still manage to ship the stuff to the UK once it was made, that's okay, isn't it? Well, globalization means that's possible. And if you've got this good old thing called the internet and mobile phones, where you can keep in touch with the factory, you can put your factory wherever you want to, can't you? It doesn't have to be in the same country. And guess what? That's what happened. Globalization happened, and our factories went to cheaper locations. Why pay a British person to do a job when you can pay somebody much less money to do it in another country? That's what happened. And you can see that there's this massive shift. So you can see countries like China and India are gradually moving up through the ranks. You can see that countries like Spain are moving down, the UK is dropping down, France is dropping down. And it's all this economies. If you can move your factory and get people to do the same quality job for less money, well, if you're a business, you're going to do that, aren't you? Because that makes financial sense. For some slightly updated figures, look, China does now win, which I don't expect surprises any of you at all. China makes more stuff than any other country in the world. So there's been a global shift, is what we call it. It's caused by globalization. More developed countries are losing their manufacturing. Less developed countries are getting the manufacturing industry. And then they go through their own version of the Industrial Revolution. Okay, this is just a few kind of facts and figures about China, none of which you need to know. I think it's the sentence at the top of the page that kind of sums it up, really. China makes and sells more manufacturing goods than any other country on the planet. Wow. And this is just some proof, if you like, that it's all about money. All three of those hyperlinks do the same kind of thing in slightly different ways. So you can see people's average annual salary. Rwanda, £576. Bangladesh, 1,300. And it just proves the point that we were trying to make. If you could pay people less money to do the same job as a business person, that's what you do, isn't it? Okay? So those hyperlinks are there just sort of for your interest, really. Now, very good question. Why on earth, Nikki, are you showing us a picture of Barbie? This is just out of interest. I thought you might be fascinated by this. It could be a little name drop example, or you could ignore it completely. Mattel is the company that makes Barbie, and Mattel made Barbie dolls in Japan for years and years and years and years. And they were one of the first manufacturers to test this idea of trying out factories in cheaper locations. They were a bit of a front runner, if you like, and they moved Barbie production to Taiwan. So they're still in Asia, but they're not in a more developed country now. And it worked amazingly. And so other companies then went, oh, well, why don't we do that? And it kind of started a whole thing. But here's the interesting part. Mattel is no longer in Taiwan, because we now have these things called multinational companies or transnational companies, massive companies like these guys, massive companies. And the point about them is they don't really care about place, just to link it back to actually what we're doing in the module at the moment. They don't really have any loyalty to particular locations. They care about getting the best profit margin they can, reducing their costs, maximising their profits, keeping their shareholders happy. Okay, that's what they want to do. So Mattel moved their factory from Japan to Taiwan, but then over the years, Taiwanese people started getting a bit, richer and a little bit more, I can't think of the word. They were standing up for themselves a little bit more and thinking, well, hang on a minute, I deserve a pay rise. I deserve a lunch break. I deserve to be treated more like a human being. So inevitably, once a country goes through its industrial revolution, people start standing up for themselves and going, excuse me, no, I am going to be treated better than this. The multinational company is so big and so powerful, they will just move to the next cheapest location. So Mattel is no longer in Taiwan. In fact, I have to be honest, I don't know quite where they are at the moment. I didn't check, sorry. But multinationals move all the time. And that is quite important for our module. It proves the idea of globalization, that you can just basically move wherever you want to these days. But it also causes huge problems with unemployment. When a multinational just clicks its fingers and decides to close a factory, you then have all of the economic issues associated with that we will learn about in the module. Okay, so all sorts of geography there. The rise and fall of the secondary sector in the UK, aka the Industrial Revolution. We lost our factories because of globalization, which is another bit of geography. We have these things called multinational companies, and the significance of them is they are so big and so powerful, they don't have loyalty to any particular locations. They will go wherever is the cheapest and best for them. And then there's a slightly more complicated bit that some of you might need a couple of attempts at. You will find factories in more developed countries. And initially, when I say that to you, that's a bit confusing because you're like, well, hang on, Nikki, you've just told us that they like to put their factories in cheap locations to maximise their profits. True, but there is a different reason, okay? So I'll do my best to explain this using the example of Toyota, and we may need to revisit this. Okay, Toyota, Japanese vehicle company, started branching out by selling to the American market in 1957 because the more people you sell cars to, the better your business is going to be. Fairly obvious. The American car companies didn't like that very much because obviously if your customers have a choice of cars, you're not going to sell quite so many cars because they might buy a Ford, they might buy a Toyota. So what the American government did is something that is called protectionism. You can protect your own companies by adding a tariff. Now, a tariff is a tax. It's a lump of money. So what they basically were saying to Toyota is, yeah, absolutely you can sell your Toyota cars in America, but we're going to tax you to do it. And that means you protect your own company because you are taxing Toyota. It's very clever. It's not massively fair on the other company, but it's very clever. Toyota then figured out that, hang on a minute, if we actually put a factory in America, they can't do that to us because we are making the cars in America. So they built a factory in America and didn't have to pay the tariff. Genius. And then they realised that if you actually had a few factories in more developed countries, you could avoid this protectionism tariff rubbish. So I'm going to come back to that one. Look, this is a map of Toyota's overseas locations. They do still manufacture in Japan. But there's a mix of less developed, where it's going to be for cheap labour, maximising profit margin, and also quite a lot of factories in more developed countries, including, look, one in the UK. And that will be about avoiding tariffs. So there's kind of two reasons as to why you find factories in these places. But what I do hope you notice is truly global. This map would not be possible without globalization because Toyota wouldn't be able to ship their cars all over the world and they wouldn't be able to communicate with all of their factories. Globalization has made this possible. This is just a little diagram for those of you who find tariffs a little bit tricky and don't feel embarrassed if you do, because quite a few people do. This doesn't use cars, this uses towels. So country A could be America, country B could be Japan, this could be the American car, obviously not for $12, but you know what I mean. This could be the Japanese car. And because this is cheaper, the American government might add a $2 tariff so that the companies in America were protected. We are going to pick up on them, so don't worry. Okay. So the summative point there, the secondary sector locates in places where it makes financial sense. There are a couple of elements to that. but it is truly global. The tertiary sector just keeps getting bigger and bigger. All right, the primary sector's got smaller, the secondary sector's done this rise and fall again, and the tertiary sector has just done this gradual increase the whole time. Remember that it's the services, and there's a really obvious correlation. As people get more money, they spend more on services. And the posh phrase that you can use here is disposable income. The money that you have available to you once you've paid for your essentials, like your rent, your electricity, your water. It's the stuff that you can spend on a takeaway, on your Spotify, your new mobile phone, a new pair of trainers, whatever. It's that money, okay? And as people get wealthier, they spend more on services. If I lived in a less developed country, I don't want to be too stereotypical here, possibly wouldn't be able to go to the hairdressers every, 6 to 8 weeks. If only. I'm in lockdown, my hair's a mess. But anyway, normal times, I go to the hairdressers once every 6 to 8 weeks. Might not be able to do that if I lived in a less developed country. My dog, spoilt thing, goes to doggy daycare on a Wednesday. Wouldn't be able to afford to do that, would I? You might not be able to afford to get your nails done. You might not be able to afford to pay somebody to cut the grass, whatever. As people get more money, they pay people to do things for them. And that's where your service sector comes from. And this, apparently, is what Brits like to spend their money on. And all of those things require the service sector. If you eat out, you need waiting staff. You need people who have designed websites. You need people who've designed the menu and the interior. You need travel agents. You need holiday reps. Thank you, brain. That's the word I was thinking for. You need cabin crew. You need people who work in rent-a-car places. You need lifeguards. You need people who work in shops, on the tills. You need all of these things that British people like to spend their money on basically create a service sector. All right. Now, right at the end of this module, and I do mean right at the end, we will be talking about a branch of the tertiary sector called the quaternary. Called the quaternary because it appeared fourth, remember, primary, secondary, tertiary, quaternary, which is a very special part called the knowledge economy, but I'm going to leave that for now. So that is where we've got to, ladies and gents, at this point in time. Might just help you do a bit of revision, more videos when we've done more of the syllabus.